I want to welcome you here tonight to this event with Dr. Rachel Fish. We're not going to talk for too long because we want to make sure we get to the main event. But I just want to acknowledge before we start that this is a hard time to be a Jewish teen, the parent of a Jewish teen, a person who cares about Jews, a person who is a Jew. And I hope that we can draw some strength from the things that we hear today from Dr. Fish, and also that we can draw some strength from each other being here. I'm Rabbi Rebecca Rosenthal. I'm the Director of Youth and Family Education at Central Synagogue. And I just want to also thank our partners here tonight, Mason Voigt from CSAIR, Rabbi Rena Rifkin from Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, Mike Whitman from Temple Emmanuel of the City of New York, Rabbi Melissa Beyer Whitman, Temple Israel of the City of New York, Rabbi Dina Cowens from B'nai Jeshurun, Kerith from Congregation Order of Shalom, and Alex from Village Temple. It is great to be able to have such incredible partners. I want to introduce you all to someone who I think many of you have had the opportunity to learn with before, Dr. Rachel Fish, who in 2021 co-founded the nonprofit Boundless, a think action tank partnering with community leaders across North America to revitalize Israel education and take bold collective action to combat Jew hatred. Dr. Fish also serves as the special advisor to the president for anti-Semitism initiatives at Brandeis University in higher education and K-12 leadership. She is also an associate professor at the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies. In addition, Dr. Fish teaches Israeli history and society at GW and is a visiting assistant professor of educational leadership in the Graduate School of Education and Human Development. Her bio is actually very long and extensive, and you can read about her many, many accomplishments on her website. But I will say that one of the things that I think she's best at and why we brought her here today was really to give us some strength and some tools to really respond to the current moment. So thank you so much for being with us. And without further ado, Dr. Rachel Fish.
Thank you so much to all of the rabbinical leadership. And thank you to the communities that came together in order to think this evening, to share this evening, and to learn. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you all, even though it is a very challenging time. I've never felt more not in New York than at this moment, but that is okay. I'm talking to you from Waltham, Massachusetts, and I'm just going to start off by telling you a little piece here around hope that I already want to put out there so you understand that this is not going to be a doom and gloom conversation, but a very practical conversation. I have the privilege, in addition to the other wonderful opportunities I have professionally, to also right now be serving in a very specific capacity at Brandeis University. I am a special advisor to President Ron Leibowitz for a new initiative at Brandeis, the Presidential Initiative to Counter Antisemitism in Higher Education. This is an initiative that we actually have thought about and he imagined several years ago, and it came to fruition in the past several months, 6 months. I was asked to serve in this position. And over the summer, we already began architecting and planning a symposium for university administrators. Obviously, unbeknownst to us, the horrors of October 7th unfolded. And as those horrors were perpetrated by terrorists, by Hamas, we knew that this work was needed all the more so. And we were starting with a pilot initiative in order to learn by working with university administrators. And the last day and a half, I have spent my time with over 100 university administrators from 23 campuses, mostly in the greater Boston area, but also Columbia, Yale, University of Pennsylvania, and a few others outside of Boston. And I just want to tell you that the administrators that came to this symposium truly are good, well-intentioned individuals who want to be able to do the work to support the students that you have, to support the communities on campus in order to better understand what is Jew hatred, how does it manifest on campus, what are the responsibilities of the university in terms of the rights and the responsibilities under Title VI from the Department of Education, from the Office of Civil Rights, and what is needed in order to develop educational interventions as well as policy interventions. So I just want to name that because I know that it can feel like every campus is burning. It can feel like every educational institution is burning, and that there are a lot of people who don't care about Jews. And I just want to tell you, there are actually a lot of people who want to do the right thing and don't know how. And so part of our jobs is to help provide them with the resources and then acquire the skills and the knowledge to actually support the diverse communities of which we are a part. So I just want to name that first. We can talk more about it as we have a conversation this evening. And I know that not everyone on this call is a grown-up. There are lots of students on this call, and so I'm speaking both to you all and to your parents and to any grandparents simultaneously. I have all of you on my screens, and so I want to make sure that I also hear from all of you. So I'm going to just give two sort of caveats. After I speak, if there are questions, I would love for students to be the first who get to raise their hands, because I really want to hear your voices and what you're thinking about and what may be challenging for you and what you may be navigating or feeling or experiencing. And then, of course, I'm going to hear from everyone else. And I also welcome any kind of question, big or small, if it's about a particular situation, if it's a larger concept. So just know that anything goes, and I think the conversation will be moderated by the rabbis, and they'll be able to share with me what you all are thinking. So let me just say a few things to frame this, which is going to be some understanding of the way in which we see anti-Semitism or Jew hatred manifest right now. And then I want to be able to talk to you about how this is intersecting with the discourse about the Jewish state, Israel. And I also then want to talk specifically about the ways in which we see these issues also on social media. So we're going to do all of those pieces. So first, I want to just name that I prefer to use the term Jew hatred. You all know what anti-Semitism is, but most Americans don't know what anti-Semitism is, let alone 13 to 35-year-olds. They do understand Jew hatred because it's much more clear. And we did research, so we have actual data to substantiate this position. And we think that the more direct we can be, even if it may feel uncomfortable to say Jew hatred instead of anti-Semitism, the more we will be able to impact people's actual understanding. And should they at all be seduced by anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, or be curious about it in terms of negatively engaging with it, it will be much more of a deterrent if they understand that it is about hating Jews. And when we ask young people, 13 to 35, what is anti-Semitism? Literally the majority say IDK. I don't know. Then they say, well, what is a Semite? Which is also a fair question, to be honest, because that is not a term we hear typically. And we can talk about, maybe you all don't know, maybe you do know what a Semite is, but it is a complicated construct and not one that everyone is familiar with. And then we also heard, and I think some of you may have heard me say this previously, that, well, I'm anti-racist, I'm anti-homophobic, I'm anti-Islamophobic, so I must be an anti-Semite. And we were like, no, you're an anti-Semite. But the construct of the word in and of itself is very confusing to individuals. And when we said, what is Jew hatred? First time everyone got it. So for that reason alone, I suggest using that term. The second reason I suggest using that term is because it is the original term that was used in Germany, Judenhass, hatred of Jews, Jew hatred. And in 1879, a German named Wilhelm Marr actually said, this term Judenhass, it's very direct, it's very crass. So we're going to make it more palatable, more politically acceptable, and we're going to call it antisemitumus. The other reason, and this is why the term Semite is confusing, is because in that 19th century, the idea of Jews starts to become a racialized concept. And as it becomes a racialized concept, it's no longer just about hating Jews because of their religion or their belief system, but now it's about hating Jews because they're not pure Aryans. They're othered. There's something that's not only German about them or enough European about them. And so this term Semite, which actually is about a territory, what we would call the Mediterranean, or before then in the ancient Near East, we call it the Levant. It's that territory that we think about in the Mediterranean region, of which Israel would be included, and many Arab countries would be included. But the term Semite was actually used to connote that geographical area and that linguistic connection between Semitic languages like Hebrew, Phoenician, Akkadian, Arabic. And so that's where you get that terminology of Semite, which is why you also hear people say, well, Arabs can't be anti-Semitic because they are a Semitic people. So it can be complicated and confusing when you only understand that term in the sense of being from a particular territorial or linguistic connection. And that racialization process that's taking place then wanted to be able to identify Jews not just based upon their religious identity, but to actually suggest they were othered as a people because they could not be purely German, European, whatever it was. And so they had to be something different, which meant they were Semitic. And that Semitic identity is then why also Wilhelm Marr says antisemitumus. Now, I don't like to use a term that was coined by an anti-Semite. I actually am not interested in it. And so therefore, I want to go back to the roots and I go to Jew hatred. So it is important to just even understand a little bit of that framing so that when you are engaging with a friend, even a classmate, someone that you know, and they then ask a question about, well, really, what is anti-Semitism? You have some language to be able to answer that. Now, as I mentioned before, we know that anti-Semitism has transformed, and it has to transform, and it has to continuously sort of find new ways to stay relevant. Otherwise, it won't be able to, as a hatred, continue to exist. And anti-Semitism is what we often hear as a millennia-old hatred. It has been here for a very long time, and it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. And so we have to understand why it has transformed and the different, what we call manifestations of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred. So one, we know that it can be hatred of Jews because of their religious identity, religious practices, or belief system. And then we just talked about how during the 19th and 20th century, Jews were racialized, particularly in a European context. And so now it was hatred not only because of religion, but hatred because of how they thought of Jews as a people. And I want you all to recall that when you start to think about Jew hatred and the way it has presented over time historically, it's not because the hater, the anti-Semite said, this Jew keeps kosher. I don't hate that Jew. I only hate the Jew who doesn't keep kosher, right? Or it's not because this Jew is the one who's not a capitalist and this one is a socialist. Meaning it's whatever the anti-Semite needs the Jew to be. And so at the 19th, 20th century point, because of the emergence also of really hyper nationalistic feelings connecting blood, like actually your DNA to a territory, and feeling like if you didn't have purity of blood and historical lineage to that land, that you didn't belong there. But it was also a piece around recognizing that this racialization was about trying to find a way to completely other the Jew and push that Jew out of the narrative of the society in which the Jew lived. But it doesn't only stop there, meaning we still have hatred of Jews because of their religion. We still see that there's this racialization process. I'll give you an example that's very recent. In the period of Charlottesville in 2017, when outside of University of Virginia, the Unite the Right, which is an alt-right white supremacist organization, gathered in Charlottesville, you had white men carrying tiki torches with Confederate flags and swastika emblems, chanting, "Jews will not replace us," which is actually a chant that is a chant about replacement theory and the idea that Jews were trying to take over parts of American society, and these individuals felt like it was going to push their identity and their position in America in a lower position. And that was very frightening for them. And so they wanted to stir up this hatred, because usually when you see anti-Semitism, it's often accompanied with other fears. Fears of not wanting migrants to come into society, fears of other immigrants, fears of other religious groups. And these individuals were using that replacement idea in order to promote a form of anti-Semitism. But in America, and in the context of America, we are more able to identify and label that form of anti-Semitism. And I think it's because we understand it has historical roots to what was happening in Europe in that 19th and 20th century. We understand it because of the history of white supremacy in the context of America. Think about the Ku Klux Klan and the impact of the Ku Klux Klan in America. And because it comes from a hard right political position that we are able to identify, and we know pretty much because of our own historical experience how it has impacted Jews. But at the same time that we have these forms of hatred based upon hating Jews because of our religious identity, hating Jews because of our racialized identity, where the hard right says you could never be white, even though many Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, present as having lighter skin color and often are understood or think of themselves perhaps as being white, it didn't matter. And so what has happened also is that we have seen that there is not only a hatred of Jews coming from the political hard right, but there's also a hatred of Jews that comes from the political hard left. And that's much harder for American Jews to have identified over the years. Now, you could say, well, why is that? And that's because we have much less practice understanding the influence of the Soviet Union and Soviet propaganda in terms of its impact on ideas of anti-Semitism. So let me give you a little bit of a historical understanding of what I mean. Some of you may have heard of a conspiracy theory that takes anti-Semitism and presents it as a pamphlet in 1903 called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in the Russian Empire. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion said the Jews, they control every aspect of society. They want to be able to have influence over the entire politics globally in order to be able to better their positions, not only in the societies in which they are living, but actually across the world. And they do it together. They actually have loyalty with one another and no loyalty to the country in which they are living. And you see in this book, in this pamphlet, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which no one claims to have written, all of these terrible ideas and images of Jews. And some of that stereotypical imagery that you have seen in history, like Jews looking like an octopus, with tentacles reaching out over the globe, or Jews looking very insidious with a long nose and very gnarly fingers and a very greedy position, trying to look money hungry or controlling. Those are images that have existed for quite a while to suggest that Jews are trying to behave in a bad way to hurt others while only benefiting for their own community or themselves. Some of that imagery came from Europe, but also what was happening simultaneously by the period of the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, and 50s is that when the Soviet Union emerges, they start to use the term Jews and Zionists synonymously. They interchange the two terms. So now it's no longer Jews control the media only, it's Zionists control the media. It's not just Jews control politics, Zionists control politics, and they do this on purpose. And why this matters is because the Soviet Union, which is quite large and has major influence, particularly in the Arab world by the period of the 1940s and 50s, it is influencing how the Arab world also understands Jews. And it's also during a period of the time of the emergence of the Cold War, where both the Soviet Union and the United States are trying to influence the larger region of the Middle East. And what happens even more than just influencing a region is that that language gets picked up by the United Nations. It gets picked up on November 10th in 1975. So just last week, 1975, the UN wrote a resolution called UN 3379 that said Zionism is racism. That moment suggested that everything about Zionism, and if you don't know what Zionism is, Zionism was a movement that was actually trying to figure out two really important questions for Jews during the time of emergence of nationalisms and the decline of empires. And specifically for Jews in Europe, the question was, what do we do about assimilation? And what do we do about anti-Semitism? And Zionism was one of the potential responses. There were others, diasporist positions, Bundist, anti-Zionist positions, lots of ideas. And it's before the state of Israel was actually in existence. And so why this matters is because Zionism becomes a very important idea that's emerging also in the 19th century. And it becomes, to some degree, a movement that is going to be about Jewish nationalism, Jewish self-determination. And there were all different ideas around what that actually meant. And guess what? Most of them didn't agree with each other. And they were competing with one another to figure out what is this place, or what should be a place, or what actually should bring Jews together in order to address these issues of assimilation and anti-Semitism. Assimilation, for any students on the call who don't know what it is, many of us are what we call acculturated Jews. We are Jews who are deeply engaged with our Jewish identity, but we live in the modern world. Assimilated Jews were Jews who were starting, especially in that period of time, to sort of lose aspects of their Jewishness in order to become more European, more German, and to downplay or diminish elements of their Jewish identity. So as the Soviet Union gains this influence and the United Nations puts out this position that Zionism is racism, which it isn't, that was a big lie, but it was very hard to overcome that big lie. And even today, we see that that is a lie that continues to fester and continues to grow. And it's not until 1991 that the United Nations repeals that idea that Zionism is racism. And when it is put forth in 1975, it's the American spokesperson, the American ambassador, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who actually refutes that position. And you can watch his speech on YouTube for anyone who's interested, and it's worth listening to because he speaks deeply committed as a New Yorker, as an American, about why it is so important to reject this idea that Zionism is racism. Why this matters is because what you begin to see by the period of the 1970s and for sure what we see playing out today, is that it's not just about hating Jews because of their religion. It's not just about hating Jews because of this supposed racialized identity, but it's also about hating Jews because of the Jewish state and the creation of the Jewish state. And why that is important to understand is because that's also part of what we see coming from the hard left and from within radical Islamism. Now, I want to say something. There are lots of us who on this call who come from different political positions or hold different identities politically. And what's important to understand is that no matter what political position you are in, if you see anti-Semitism at all within your political community, it's actually your responsibility to educate people in that community and also call it out. And it's much more impactful if you're a Democrat and you see it in the Democratic Party and you address it, if you're a Republican and you see it in the Republican Party, address it, versus shooting across the aisle in order to point fingers. Because I can tell you, and you all know this, anti-Semitism exists in every political position. So we have to be swivel-headed and not have any blind spots and be able to address it, label it, define it, and then actually be able to counter it. That's very, very important. Now, I need to say something about the way we see anti-Semitism manifesting today, and then we can open it up to a conversation. And I'll talk just 2 seconds about social media before we ask questions. I want to be very clear that you can criticize Israel. You can criticize Israeli policy. Every single Israeli, and I know a lot of Israelis, they criticize all the time. For those of us who are paying close attention over the past 10 months, we have seen all different types of Israelis. Mizrahi, Jews from the Arab world, from the East. Ashkenazi, Jews from European descent. Ethiopian Jews, Russian Jews, out in the streets of Israel advocating for all different types of positions within Israeli society. Those individuals are deeply committed to Zionism, and they are fierce critics of the Israeli government, of Israeli decision makers, of fellow Israeli positions. And there is nothing wrong with that. If you care about a place and you care so much about a place that you want to critique it, that means you're committed. So this is not about criticism of a position around settlements or the current government. Anyone can do that. What we see playing out, whether it's on college campuses, in some middle school, high school, even in some elementary schools, in some businesses, what we see playing out even in the media, so much of that is a different starting place. The starting place is, does Israel have a right to exist? And the answer is no. That's what they think. Now, there are some people who say, I don't think any nation state has a right to exist. That's usually an exceptional position, meaning there are very, very few people who actually hold those kinds of positions. Most people don't question actual existence that exists for a nation state. So when they are saying, does Israel have a right to exist? They're saying, do Jews have the right to a state? Do Jews as a collective have the ability to have agency and define for themselves how they want to address the issues that impact us the most? And if you want to live in a place with Jewish time, right, that has a Hebrew calendar, where you say Shabbat Shalom when you get off the bus on a Friday afternoon, that's the state of Israel. And individuals who say that place has no right to exist with the world's largest Jewish population is holding an anti-Semitic position, I would argue. That's my own position. So what I see playing out on college campuses, when they say, no, I'm just criticizing Israel, it's not criticism. Because if they want to criticize Israel, there's lots of space for that conversation. And also what I see playing out are not individuals who are talking about how do we make Israel a more shared society between Israeli and Arabs? How do we create better coexistence? Those are all very important conversations. But instead, what I'm seeing is individuals who support, rationalize, justify, and even celebrate the actions of terrorists. The terrorists and the terrorism and the violence and the evil that we saw that killed over 1,400 Israelis who were sleeping in their beds, who were going to go to synagogue for Simchat Torah, who were spending time with their families, who had nothing to do with any single decision made by the government. They were just living their lives. And so that, in my opinion, is a radical form of Islamism that actually seeks to harm every single Jew wherever we live. That is a form of anti-Semitism as well. And I know that that is very hard for many of us. And I'm really talking to the students right now because we care deeply about all different types of peoples. You all live in New York. You're around a mosaic of religion, of ethnicity, of nationalities. It's amazing. I mean, this is why America is so special. And so it feels very, very hard to really imagine that someone hates a people so much they could kill you. But that's actually what played out when we saw the horrors of October 7th. And in some places, it's why we're so concerned when we see the way anti-Semitism exists in America. And I'll say two things just about America and then social media. For American Jews, we thought that our American Jewish experience was exceptional in America. We said it's not like Europe. It's actually not like Jews experienced in the Middle East or North Africa. And we said America is so different, which it is, in so many ways, that we're never going to have the same type of anti-Semitism that has existed previously in Jewish history. Now, what we're seeing playing out in America is still different. It is not coming top down by our government, by our political leaders, through institutionalized laws. And we have to recognize that anti-Semitism exists in America. We couldn't escape it. We thought we could. Some people are still hoping we can. But I'm telling you, anti-Semitism is very real. And so now we have to find a way to educate our friends about it, to help our teachers understand it, because when anti-Semitism emerges, when it starts to rear its ugly head, it is the beginning of the fraying of democracy, and it never ends with the Jews. It just is the starting place, and it keeps festering. And that then tells you you're living in a society that is very, very sick and unhealthy. And so we are in a place where you all should feel very strong because you have an opportunity to educate people. Now, I'll say one more thing, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Many of you are on social media. I get it. I do not encourage it, but I'm a realist that you're going to be on it. But I want to tell you a couple of things about social media. One, the algorithms are built so that what enrages engages. That's how they're built. You can't control that. So if you post something that is really hurtful, it's going to get a lot of attention. And people feel the ability to post and say really bad things and do it with a level of what we would say anonymity, anonymously. Maybe they wouldn't say it to your face if you were standing in front of them, but through a screen, mediated, they feel very comfortable doing it. And so the purpose of social media is to give you a hit of dopamine that makes you angry or makes you really happy. And when it makes you really angry, it stokes that desire to keep responding and keep responding. And you're going to have to figure out, is it actually worth the response? And if it's someone you actually know, can you say to them, can we have this conversation in real life and not via social media? Last two things. There is real foreign influence from foreign governments that are very, very problematic that are looking to push political and ideological agendas. And we now officially know this, whether it's China, whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia. So you can't even be sure that the content that you're engaging with is authentic or real. It can be doctored by artificial intelligence. It could be pushed by one of these governments. And we also now know, and there was a recent report on this, that 1 in 4 accounts on social media are actually created by bots for the purpose of this particular conflict between Israel and Hamas. So you may see something that you see online and want to respond, but legitimately, you don't even know if you're talking to a person. It could just be a bot that you're responding to, and you're just going to keep getting more upset, and it's going to drive that algorithm. So you really do need to be careful about what you see online, and you really need to talk to grown-ups so that you can use your critical thinking skills and your digital literacy skills to know if what you are engaging with is credible and has veracity. Because if it doesn't, then you're engaging with something or pushing some content that actually may be dangerous, that's not even coming from a real human. Okay, that was a lot, but I'm going to hand it to you, Rabbi Rosenthal.
Okay, I have a lot of questions and I'm going to try to get to them all.
Okay.
Or we'll just do a speed round. So there's a question about the misconception around colonialism and settler colonialists and colonizing, and how would you sort of counter that when people say it or you see it online?
You want to give me a few at once?
Sure. There was a lot of questions about the best practices around Jew hatred on campus and how you might respond to that, including the film Israelism. And someone asked a very specific question. If you could take 1 or 2 actions to advocate for the safety of Jewish kids in a public school, what would those actions be? Like, what would you encourage parents to do? And then there were a number of questions about DEI and how you can help schools and but we'll stick with schools for the moment. Think about DEI under the framework of anti-Semitism under a DEI framework, or should we be doing that or not?
Okay, great. So let's look at a few of these school questions first, and then I'll come to colonial colonization and colonialist settler. If you are on a college campus, and if you are in any other kind of educational setting, public school, independent school, whatever it may be, primary or secondary, and you encounter some form of anti-Semitism, you have to report it before anything else can be done. Meaning if you choose not to report it, very little can be done. And I say that explicitly because I am encountering a lot of families and a lot of children and a lot of teenagers and college students who say, what am I supposed to do? Why should I report it? Is it going to make a difference? And the answer is, for sure it won't if you don't report it. So you have to. Now, you report it to the educational leadership. Depending upon that institution, it depends then who that individual is. But you can always go to a teacher, you can go to the principal, you can go to the superintendent. It just depends the structure of the school. For a university, you need to go to a few places like the ombudsman. You need to go to Hillel or Chabad on campus. You can go to a trusted faculty member, because if you go to a trusted faculty member, they also then have a responsibility to report it as well. And you should go to either the dean of student life, the dean of residential life, if it happened in the dorms, the dean of academic affairs, if it's something that happened in a classroom, or you can also go to the diversity, equity, and inclusion office. But it is actually your responsibility, should you see something or hear something or an issue exists that is anti-Semitic, that you go to one of those outlets and actually tell them. You can also report it to the Anti-Defamation League. There is now a new resource that exists where the Anti-Defamation League, the Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, the Louis D. Brandeis Center, not affiliated with the university, and a law firm that exists, have all combined their legal efforts in order to be able to support students on college campuses. Now, this is specific to college campuses. because if a university receives federal funding, which almost every university receives, you then are obligated by the federal government to be in compliance with the 1964 Title VI rule of the Office of Civil Rights. The Title VI Office of Civil Rights says that you cannot have any discrimination based upon race, based upon your identity as a male or female, and also based upon your national origin. And under the executive order of 13899, which was an executive order that actually had begun prior to the Trump administration, it actually began to emerge during the Obama administration. That executive order says that every university has to ensure that students for national origin, that Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, other communities are included in that, even though it doesn't name religion. And the reason they have to be included is because of this sense of shared ancestry and heritage, which is why it then is encapsulated under this idea of national origin. It is really important then that your university is in compliance with the Office of Civil Rights, Title VI. If you're actually a faculty or a staff member of a university, it's Title VII. It's not Title VI, but it's the same ruling. It's the same framework. And that's also about not then allowing any targeted discrimination or any kind of perceived discrimination or prejudice towards those particular communities based upon this concept of national origin. Jews are included in that because part of our national origin, part of an essential component of Judaism, is this connection to this idea of Zion, this place, this land. When we sit at a Seder table, we talk about B'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim. It is a national meta kind of historical connection to Jerusalem. When we pray, we face towards the east. We're not facing towards a shtetl in Europe. So this place actually matters to us, and that's an essential piece. So that's how you have to think about this. There are very important places that you have to report it, and it becomes about what the issue is, meaning how that anti-Semitic whether it was, vandalism or something that was said or the way it targeted Jews, the impact of it. And that then is what the issue will be. That is what they're going to examine. So that's an important piece of this. In terms of the conversation around what you do when you encounter and you don't actually get a response, that's when you need to go to outside organizations that now exist in order to ensure that they then can help with the follow-up. And the Brandeis Center is a very important address for that when it comes specifically to universities. It's a little bit different for public school institutions and private institutions at the secondary and primary level because they don't necessarily receive federal funding in the same way. So that's a different conversation, even though they still need to be held accountable for any issues of anti-Semitism. Now, part of this process is how I started this conversation. For many of these individuals, they don't understand what anti-Semitism is, and they need your help to be able to actually know what to do, and they need the education. And there are two approaches to this. Obviously, if it's something so egregious, you want them to call it out. You want them to condemn it. You want them to address it immediately. For other issues, even when it's very egregious, they need you to call them in to that educational process so they can learn. Rather than beat them up, it's not going to help you. You need to be able to educate them so they then have the skills to do the right thing in terms of addressing the issue of anti-Semitism. So you need to have both of those approaches. Now, the concept of colonialism, colonizer, and settler colonialism, I want to this is a huge conversation. but I want to highlight a couple of elements to it.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, can I interrupt you? Because I
sure.
have a sort of secondary question that comes from a ninth grader, and I think it's related to this one, and maybe you can answer
Great.
all of those pieces together. That she said also, you hear a lot that people are arguing that the Israeli government caused these events, or the Israeli government is doing war crimes or all kinds of things. And what if you don't feel like you know enough to be able to respond to either the settler colonial piece, the Israeli government causing this piece, the war crimes question? Like, how can you respond if you don't know how to respond?
That's a great question. Meaning, if you don't actually know how to respond, it may not make sense to pretend because you may not get it right. Right. So it's actually better to say to someone something like this: I don't have all the answers, and I don't know what you're saying completely. And so I need to go learn some more. And then I want to have a conversation with you. And it's totally fine to say that. Right? Nobody knows everything about every subject. And then you can go and you can do some serious homework, and you can read and you can learn. And there are a variety of resources that you can look at, whether it's with the AJC, American Jewish Committee. And if you're in high school, they have a program called LIFT, specifically for high school students, that educates around a lot of these issues. There's also some initiatives for middle school students. There's one organization I know for sure that does education with middle school students around the history of Israel. That is the Tikva program. There are other organizations, I'm sure, that are also in this space. There's also a really important sort of glossary that exists online through the American Jewish Committee called Translate Hate. And it actually can help you look up certain terms to understand how those terms are used at different points in time, so that you understand some of that language that's even being thrown out there. So those are just some really good resources to know about. You see the background I have. I would love to tell you that there was a book, because I do love them, that you could just pick up and read, and you'll have all the answers. There's really not a singular book. There are some books that exist. Some books like Noah Tishby's book, for those of you who may have seen it, can be a resource. For grown-ups, I would suggest looking at Essential Israel. It's not, for young adults and for college students. It's a book that I edited with my professor, Elon Troen, and you can read different chapters. You don't have to read the whole thing, and it can be useful in terms of addressing some of these issues. There's also an academic journal, and so it should be translated in a way that is more accessible for a more popular audience, but it's called Israel Studies, and there was one specific volume for those of you who may have access to an academic library called Word Crimes, and it actually talks about how some of these terms, racism, apartheid, colonialist settler, how these words have been used in order to weaponize them and to manipulate human rights discourse to bludgeon Israel, to hurt Israel. And so those are some places that you can get some information. But I think what's really important, Rabbi Rosenthal, is actually for students to say, you know what? I am very proud of my Jewish identity, but I don't know everything that I need to know. And so I need to learn some more. And actually, we should try to learn together, or let me learn and I'm going to come back to you and let's have a conversation. And I think that's a really okay thing to say. And it demonstrates that we all don't know everything and it takes time to learn. If you are interested in learning, I will share with you just a few things just to have in mind around this conversation of colonialism. Some of you have already been studying about European history or American history. And what happened over time is that the term colonialism has become sort of a dirty word. But it doesn't have to be a dirty word, but it's often perceived that way. And when you think about colonialism often has a connotation that they're a group of people who are leaving their motherland, they're going to another land, they're going to extract all the resources from that place and send them back to the motherland. That's one element of colonialism. Why that matters is because that is not what the Zionists were doing when they went to the land of Palestine. They went to that place, but they actually thought that that was their motherland. They didn't think of those shtetls in Europe as their motherland. And when they got to Palestine, they realized there were no resources, and there was definitely nothing to extract. And even if they could extract it, they weren't sending it back to Europe. So the concept of colonialism doesn't exactly match with the early Zionist pioneers who were going to this place. Now, there is a very real process of colonization. Now, someone could say, you're just making, like, this is semantics. Colonialism, colonization, what's the difference? Well, colonization is actually a process in which individuals who want to move to this place, who want this place to be their home, they're actually going to colonize it in order for it to be livable for them. The resources that they're going to build and to create and the communities they are going to create are actually going to stay in that place, and they're going to build little colonies so that they can create and establish a presence in a particular territory that they feel a connection to. And that's what the Zionists were doing. What's also important to remember is that there's always been a Jewish presence in this territory. There was a Jewish presence in terms of just traditional Jews who were connected to this place. We know that after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, there is diaspora. Jews actually go out of this territory to all different parts of our world. And there are still Jews who remain in certain parts of the territory. And the people who do remain tend to be very traditionally, religiously engaged and stayed in religiously significant locations. Places like Tzfat, Hebron, Yerushalayim, these places that are very, very deeply connected to aspects of Jewish tradition and sort of the history of the Jewish people from the place of Judea, which is where Jews come from. So when someone says, well, Jews have no connection to this place, Jews are deeply connected. They're sort of an aboriginal people to this place. And think of it as aboriginal. But that doesn't mean that you don't have lots of movement of different types of people during a modern period. And when you have lots of movement, you are going to encounter that not everyone stays in one location. So this is the other tricky piece of this. And this is a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try to explain it. So bear with me, Rabbi Rosenthal, because it's going to take just a few minutes here. There is an intellectual concept around colonialist settler. And if I'm teaching in a classroom, I would do a deep dive into understanding the theory of what it means to be a state that you actually, or a place, a territory that you build with a presence and you settle in. And that is a theory that you can apply to lots of other nation states and look about what makes them the same, what makes them different. And that's an important academic conversation to have. The challenge is that when it comes to the conversation about Israel, is that an intellectual idea like post-colonialism, or sometimes you hear about decolonization. Those two kinds of ideas basically say anything having to do with colonialism is bad. Why? Because they say colonialism is based on a power structure where the people who hold power tend to look white, and the people who look white and are powerful tend to be the oppressor. And the people who are dark-skinned and who are deemed to be native to that place are deemed to have no power. They're powerless. And ultimately, that means they are the oppressed. But that's a very, very simplistic understanding. And because it's so simplistic, it actually becomes very convenient. And you can say, well, that must have been what the Jews did to the Palestinians. So then you start to hear things like, Israel is a white, imperialist, colonialist outpost in the region that has displaced the dark-skinned native population who is powerless. First of all, it's not historically accurate. Secondly, I can tell you that the conflict between Arabs and Jews, and then Jews and Palestinians, is about a lot of things. It's about territory. It's about religion. It's about contested nationalisms and competing nationalisms. But I can also tell you it's not about race. It's not about skin color. And it doesn't mean that there aren't issues in Israeli society with prejudice. There are. But this has never been a racial conflict. And in America, we like to make a lot of things about things we know something about. And so we take the American lens of race and we apply it to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that's actually not good. And when you see that happening, you have to stop them. And you have to say, I think what's happening here is that we're taking a concept we're familiar with and putting it on a region that we actually can't apply it to. That's why you can't say that Zionism is racism, because Zionism was never about actual skin color. It was never about race. That's why it's also just false to say Zionism is apartheid, because apartheid was an institutionalized legal and political system based upon a racial conflict between Blacks and whites. That is not what is happening in Israel. So you have to be able to say to someone, can you define for me how you are using these terms? Can you help me understand when you say colonialist, what are you actually saying? Now, if this is someone who is very well intentioned, someone you have a relationship with, you can have that conversation. It may not be easy, it may not be comfortable, but you can actually do it. And I'm confident that by even just hitting the pause button and saying, can you just explain to me what you mean? It will help level set. Because if you don't know what they mean, I guarantee you they don't know what they mean, and they're just pulling language from slogans that they have heard. Also, just because it rhymes doesn't make it right, right? So we hear a lot of these slogans right now, and they're catchy. And it feels like, well, maybe there's something to this. But you've got to be able to have your critical thinking skills in place to say, I want to have a real conversation. Now, here's the tricky part. If you're out on the campus quad and there's this massive rally happening, probably not the right time to have a real conversation. So you have to know when to try to have that conversation. And also, someone who doesn't want to have the conversation with you and just wants to label you a colonizer, a supporter of ethnic genocide, someone who supports racism. That's where I will say that anti-Zionism is not at all about thoughtful criticism of Israel. That is when I see anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. So you have to push people appropriately, intellectually, to help you understand what they mean by these terms. And then you can have a conversation with them or not, depending upon who they are.
Can I sneak in one more question here right at the end?
Sure.
So we have a lot of questions about DEI and schools and whether anti-Semitism should fall under a DEI framework and how to help schools place it there if that's where it belongs.
A great question. Again, like I said, just spent a day and a half with university administrators. These were everyone from DEI offices, provost offices, admissions offices. And here's what I will tell you, and I heard it today actually from a colleague at the ADL. The E part, equality, actually the universities have done really well in the 20th and late 20th, early 21st century for Jews. Jews have a lot of equality on these campuses. It's the I part that is a problem for Jews. We're not always included. And so we have to be able to think about how we help these professionals actually understand their blind spots around the way in which DEI has created some very problematic binaries, primarily based on skin color. For many, in the conversation around DEI in education, whether it's on campus or whether it's an elementary, primary, whatever, secondary school, there is an assumption that Jews are white. It is a problematic assumption. Therefore, if Jews are white, they are deemed to be part of the majority. Jews are also not understood as an ethno-religious community. We are a religion and we are a people. Being a religion and a people complicates the DEI model dramatically. So the DEI piece, the E is for equity. So someone mentioned that. So it's the equity piece that campuses have been very good at for Jews. It's the inclusion piece that not so much. And so what we have to be able to do is both, I would argue, challenge the existing DEI paradigm as it is, because the majority of us deeply care about diversity, we deeply care about equity, and we deeply care about inclusion. I mean, in our own communities, this is what we care about, let alone in the broader society in which we are living. So we have to challenge it because the current framework does not understand ethno-religious Jews. It doesn't get us, and we don't fit in a box, and defining us based upon race by skin color doesn't work. So we have to challenge that paradigm. Challenging that paradigm, it depends on the institution. Sometimes challenging it may be actually seeing if it actually is the right model for that institution. It may not be, and you may have to come up with something else. In other places, it may be a model that has the ability in which you have individuals who are willing to be educated and understand it and find better educational and policy interventions in order to address the issue of Jew hatred. But you have to look at each institution to understand the particular context and the individuals who are formulating those positions. What I will say is that if the DEI model you encounter is only simplistically looking through a lens of issues of skin color, you need to be able to have these conversations in order to be able to long-term solve for it, because that existing model does not take anti-Semitism into its consideration. And so it just depends, but you're going to have to make that call based upon the actual organization.
So I really want to thank you, Dr. Fish, for this incredible, very informative, so much wonderful information. Zoom, I know we did not get to everyone's question, and I also know that this is a topic that is going to continue to be at the forefront of our minds. And I just want to say to everyone on this Zoom, that is what community is for. So I really want to encourage you, if things come up, to reach out to your educators, to your rabbis and cantors, and we are here to help you navigate through this as best we can. We need community now more than ever. We need Jewish community. We need to stand up and be strong. For those of us who were in DC yesterday, we really saw the manifestation of that, of all of us coming together. And even if we didn't love every single thing that every single person said, there was power in coming together with 300,000 people. So I want to thank Dr. Fish for really giving us such incredible information and really helping us start to unpack this topic that we will continue to talk about. There will be a recording of the Zoom. We will send out a recording of the Zoom. We will send out the resources that we put in the chat and any other resources, but we also encourage you to be in touch with us if you need something specific. As she said, every school is different, every family is different, everything else is different. For those of you that have high school sophomores, juniors, and seniors, we will be doing another collaboration about anti-Semitism on campus and looking towards schools with Julia Jassy from Jewish on Campus. Jewish on Campus. She's terrific. And you'll be getting information about that as well. So thank you to all of our collaborators. Thank you to Dr. Rachel Fish. Thank you to all of you for being here, and have a good night.